Good evening. I'm Anthony Newbold, and this is Legends Whence We Came. My guest this evening met and married one of the most pivotal figures in Bahamian political history more than 50 years ago. And as we prepare to acknowledge a movement that he led for most of his life, we will get to find out what it was like to be up close and personal with Sir Randol Fawkes. Please help me welcome Lady Jacqueline Fawkes. Lady Jacqueline, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
And it's my pleasure to get you to talk about your husband on this very special, getting ready to celebrate Labor Day.
I think he's my favorite topic.
Your favorite topic?
Yes.
We're going to talk about that because I think you were his favorite topic too, even though some people might say labor. When and how did you meet Sir Randol?
Well, I actually met him in 1948, but a little earlier than that. I was born in Grand Bahama.
Okay, you're Grand Bahama again.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and well, my father was from Eleuthera, and my mother was Grand Bahamian,
Mm-hmm.
and they had 10 of us. I'm their very first daughter.
Okay.
And since my brother was always in Governor's Harbor with his grandfather, who was a catechist in the Methodist Church, I came up almost as a first child.
Okay.
And I liked my position in the family. Sometime later, my father noticed that, well, with all these kids, we can't afford to live in this little island. There's only a little road in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
How am I going to buy 10 pairs of shoes on my small salary?
Mm-hmm.
He was a government worker, and he was a very good government worker. He did every little thing. He was a postmaster, he was a telegraphist.
Yes.
And if the commissioner wasn't there, he was also the commissioner.
Commissioner as well?
Yes. So
he was in charge then?
He was in charge, but 10 children, well, that's a lot of mouths to feed. So one Sunday afternoon, when I was about 16, we looked into the newspaper that we got every fourth night from Nassau. He says, "Look here, Dad. Look here, Mom. We have here a new high school that's coming into Nassau, and it's by our church, the Anglican Church."
Mm-hmm.
And they said, right away they said, "Well, maybe we can get some of you kids into that. You know, that's where you're going to learn to do something to help yourselves."
Mm-hmm.
Well, in a month or two, the whole family was moving up to Nassau.
To Nassau.
And so my sister, the first sister after me,
Mm-hmm.
went into St. John's College and started our Nassau career.
Okay.
We moved into Fort Fincastle because my father always loved Fort Fincastle, and we built a home there. And of course, that was where Sir Randol lived.
Mm-hmm.
At the time we moved there, I believe he was a law student, and so you didn't see very much of him, but yet we knew that in that two-story house across there, some people in there, and they were the Fawkes.
Okay.
One day, Father Llewellyn said, "We need some new classrooms, and we are going to send you kids out, and you're going to sell these blocks."
You in St. John's now, is that it?
Yes, we're in St. John's.
Okay.
And we're going to sell these blocks, and each block is going to cost $1. We're going to sell blocks, or we're going to get money to buy blocks.
To buy some blocks, yeah.
I put it that way. I wasn't omitting anybody. I knew that if we sold the most blocks in the top form, we were going to get the one-day holiday, and I wanted it. So I just stopped into this house. I saw an elderly lady on a porch. Well, of course, I'm much older now than she was then, but to me, she was an elderly lady.
She was an elderly lady at that point.
Yes. And she said, and I said, "Would you like to help St. John's College by giving me $1 for a ticket, and then we'll have it to buy a block for the new classroom?" She called her son, and she introduced him, and she said, this is my son, his name is Randol, and he has just passed his bar examination. I looked at him. By that time, I was 18, and I went to school the next day, and I really thought about him a whole lot.
Impressed you even then, eh?
Yeah. And, well, things went on, and I finally got a call from his mom, and she wanted to know if I was interested in being a secretary, because I said that I was going to be, you know, coming from the island. You want to use some words to impress some people. I want to be a stenographer. And that was a big word to be in those days.
In those days, yes.
So she said, I didn't realize that she was just taking in all these things. But she called me and she said, will you be a secretary? And I said, well, I don't think so. I have a little more time in school, and I think I'd like to complete the course. Well, she didn't take no for an answer. There was a lady by the name of Althea Mortimer, who lived on Meeting Street.
Top of the hill, yeah.
Who was my teacher of commercial subjects. So we went to the same church, St. Mary's in Nassau, and we went to St. Mary's in Grand Bahama. So there comes Mrs. Mortimer after church and said, you know something? You can get a good education in a legal office, and I think you should take it when you consider how many kids your parents have.
Yeah.
Well, I think she persuaded me, and I went in there. And the first thing I noticed and getting in there was, well, there was the secretarial office, and then he said, would you like to have a look around? I looked around the building. He called it his chambers, you know, he was very proper
of course,
too.
Yes.
His chambers, and of course, you know, he had manners like a prince. One wouldn't think that he could call a general strike.
He fooled a lot of people.
Yes. So I went and I looked, I saw a picture of Sir Winston Churchill, and I looked over there and I saw Abraham Lincoln. I saw Mahatma Gandhi, Einstein, and then I saw Marian Anderson. She was the greatest singer. And I looked around the books and I saw that there were biographies of some wonderful people. Yeah. So I said, well, what is this short guy all about?
Intriguing as well.
Yes,
right?
And I noticed that he was interested in sports. You know, by working there, I noticed that he was either president or a member or something in the government high school Old Scholars organization.
Right.
I noticed all those things. I noticed also that he had something of a will. He had convictions.
Yes.
And he was strong.
Strong-willed, eh?
Yeah, and he would stand by these things. Somehow I liked those things. My father was something like that. I liked those things. So I worked with him for a while, and then I went off and worked for one of my father's friends. And but it wasn't long after that that he called me back. I didn't go back to work. He called me to get married.
Yes. How long was that? How long was that?
It all took from 1948, and the marriage was 1951.
Yes. And it's a question I was going to ask you later down. First, that wasn't a very difficult decision for you to say, yes, I'll marry you. Was that difficult for you?
It was. Well, the way he put it, I think it's in his book, he simply said, will you marry me in May 1951? And my reaction was, I'm not interested. But I knew better.
Yeah, you knew what you wanted to do.
Where those words came from. Well, anyway, I just got on my bicycle and I went up the hill, East Street, to get back to Fort Fincastle, and I just thanked my Lord. And you know, he waited until I was finished taking a senior examination in December, then both my parents were written.
Yes. And again, tell me about that, because kids watching the show don't understand what we're talking about.
Now, the letter was written to Mr. and Mrs. L.G. Bethel, and it said all the things that he should have told me, like I'm very fond of your daughter Jacqueline, things like that. But with me, I just got a letter that said the same thing he told me in the office.
Yeah.
I didn't bother to answer that right away. I thought, you know, like island girls think, just don't be so easy, you know, just be a little bit
Yeah,
hard to get.
a little hard to get, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, women still are that way, I think, right? But I wanted to ask you, because it seems clear to me, everything I've heard and read, certainly in his books, Sir Randol was what, and I think he would like this particular word since he was such a poet and was interested in literature. I think we can say he was besotted with you from the very beginning. And I was reading something from his book, and I love a great love story, by the way.
Okay.
So I love your story. I was reading something from him writing in chapter 7 of The Faith That Moved the Mountain. Guess who inspired the starry-eyed dreamer to recite love sonnets all day long? I love you not only for what you are, and this is one of
I am when I'm with
see, you can finish it. I love you not only for what you are, but for what I am when I'm with you. I love you not only for what you are making of yourself, but for what you are making of me. She called me the poet. I called her the poem.
Yes.
You were a compliment to him.
Yes, and you know, breaking this to say something to the little children. When I first got married, I slept until 7 o'clock. And somebody who had dreams, burning dreams, they wanted to be up at 6 o'clock and they wanted breakfast. The new wife is supposed to get the breakfast. I was always late, 7 o'clock, that was my hour. And he'd never say, sleepyhead, get up, let's get going. He'd say things like this. He had this, he said, look to this day. Now, he started like this. Listen to the salutation of the dawn. Look to this day, for it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the realities and the truths of your existence. The joy of growth, the splendor of action, the glory of power. For yesterday is but a memory, and tomorrow is only a vision. But today well lived makes every yesterday a memory of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. And by that time, I was awake.
You that's one way of saying get up.
I found it later on somewhere, and I kept it.
Yeah, but that's it. That's a much nicer way of saying, darling, you really need to get out of bed, as opposed to, that's a much nicer way.
That was
You
what
had
he
no
did.
problem getting up after that, eh?
Oh, no. And another thing was that as a youngster, Randol played the saxophone. And so he knew some music. But there was an old piano in his mother's living room. What he did was he went there and he tried to pick out some notes because he knew the notes. And he started to play things like the Moonlight Sonata and something called A Dream of Love. And I would be awakened with the music. And now I have a telephone that when it rings, it says, it rings with the Moonlight Sonata. And so there's always music around the place.
We're going to talk some more about that. Keep the thought. We got to take a break. And we'll be back with more legends after this. Welcome back. You're watching Legends Whence We Came. I'm Anthony Newbold, and my guest this evening is Lady Jacqueline Fawkes. We're talking about her life with Sir Randol. If music be the food of love. You know that line, don't you?
Play on.
Play on, play on. I could just, I'm imagining, and we're going to talk to Rosie later on, it must have been fun being around a man who loved poetry and loved music.
Yes.
Yeah. But you also, you met him and he was a law student and then he's called to the bar. He was already involved in political activity, wasn't he?
Well, in working at his office, I noticed that there was never a meeting at the House of Assembly. We called it the House of Assembly, not Parliament in those days, that he did not attend. He was not a member, but the meetings were in the evenings, and people went there, members went there in tailcoats and all dressed up, really. But he would go to their meetings and sit in the gallery, and he would come back on the next day and he would say things like, I don't see why we cannot be affiliated with the University of the West Indies. And he was always talking about this freedom and the next freedom and so on.
Looking to see which way and how he could help somebody who was not so
The next thing I knew, I was typing a book. And the title of the book was, You Should Know Your Government. That was in 1949. And I remember that I think his sister was also in the office at the time, his younger sister, Coral. And between us, we typed up that book, and I think it was printed by the Tribune.
He always had your support in whatever he did. Did you ever try to discourage him from going so far in the deep?
I believed in him. I just knew he was right, and I still believe he's right. I still believe he's right. And a whole lot of things that he told me in those days, I'm still looking to see those things come to pass.
Come to fruition, eh?
Yes.
Tell me about those early days in the labor movement when he was just, the people were following him. He was galvanizing support. Tell me about those early days.
Yes.
Do you
Well,
remember?
most of those days, meetings were held at nights. The House of Labor wasn't always there. They were held on the parks, and there was a place they called Bodie Building.
Yes,
that they
on Wolf Road.
Yes, that they could rent, and so a lot of meetings were held there. Now, most of those meetings I would be home with the children. By the time we were having children, and by the time the labor movement really got started, there were 3 of them.
How challenging, and we're going to talk about the labor movement again in a moment, how challenging was it to raise these children? And Randol is everywhere, getting in everybody's business and calling strikes and all that stuff. How much of a challenge was it to raise the children?
And still be his girl Friday.
Yes.
I am going to tell you that it wasn't all that difficult. I didn't think it was all that difficult. I have always been blessed with a tremendous amount of energy. We didn't live very far away from my mom and all my sisters and brothers, who, if I needed to be here or there, they could keep my kids. And you didn't have to pay the maid an arm and a leg.
On a leg, yeah.
So that we always had a maid. In fact, we had a lot of fun with our kids. When Francis was born, and 13 months later, Rosalie came along, and we had a carriage, and so we just put both the children in the carriage, and we, the happiest couple, taking these kids down the road for a walk. I think they loved it, and we loved doing it.
So that whatever else he was doing, I call it extracurricular activity, but it was so much primary activity, did not detract in any appreciable way from your enjoyment of family life.
In fact, when I went to any of those meetings, I would hear they had a couple of preachers, perhaps Baptist preachers, and they would open with a prayer, They would sing songs, union songs, and they would sing hymns. And so much so that I would hear people come and ask him, Brother Fawkes, any church tonight?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, if they were going to have a program, they would call me and ask me, would you chair this concert for me?
Yeah.
And, of course, if they were having a party, especially after you got into politics, you know, all the politicians had to give their constituents a party every Christmas.
Right.
So I would go to Miami and I would take somebody out of the constituency with me, and we would go to the wholesale place and buy up a lot of toys, bring back a lot of boxes. I don't know how I ever got through customs, but I did. And all the women would come out and help us to have a great time. Dozens and dozens of bottles of sodas given to us by the soda companies, things like that. So I had a good time with the people as well. We had a chap by the name of Eugene Butler. We used to call him Brother Butler. He just died here the other day.
Just died, yeah.
He was the one that did the burial rites, I guess, the graveside rites of my husband. But he came to our house ever so often. And I always remember the last visit at the smaller house, and he said, now he says, don't you worry, because the battle is the Lord's. At that time, my husband had been arrested before my eyes. I was in his office typing, and 3 people from the police division came, and they said they wanted to speak with him for a while, so I pointed the room. They spoke with him. Then he came out with them, and he says, Jackie, he says, these people have come to carry me to jail. I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
I closed up the office right away, and I went home. But before doing that, I called the General Secretary of the Union and some others, and I told them to go to the guardroom because that's where he was.
Yeah.
And he had asked me to do that before leaving. Well, in a few moments after I got home, he had gotten bail, and he was there to the house, and lots of Union people were around the place, and he said, I'm going to Jamaica.
Right.
So, and he didn't have any Jamaican money or anything like that, but the ladies, the Union ladies, helped him to pack.
Yeah, and I was reading about that because I think Clinton and Strawn were 2 of those policemen. I don't remember the 3rd one, but he's going to Jamaica, and I think eventually he ended up in London, and people like Sam Stubbs and Marion Stewart and Garth Wright were some of those people who helped to.
Yes, yes. But in Jamaica, he went straight to the office of the Prime Minister, who was then Norman Washington Manley.
Right.
And Mr. Manley said, we're going to give you our best. And
By the way,
I remember Vivian Blake.
Vivian Blake, who
Yes.
a lot of us found got to know later on.
Yes.
Let's say, because we didn't say why he was arrested. He was arrested and charged with sedition.
He was arrested and charged with sedition. Randol had gone to Andros and was speaking to some people at a lumber farm, trying to make the union larger. Well, they said he was trespassing, so they bound him over to keep the peace for 3 years, and he didn't like it. So he went on the Southern Recreation Ground, and they all came out there. Nobody in the union liked it.
Right.
And they said a few things.
In his words, he excoriated the president, the government of the then government of the day, among other things. He was quite harsh with them in what he had to say.
Okay.
Right? That was a good description. He excoriated them.
Right. And I beg your pardon. I think I lost my thread.
Yeah, we were talking about him. He went to Andros speaking on behalf of, I think, a fellow by I don't remember his name, Ralph somebody, was dismissed after he came back from Andros, actually. And he subsequently went to the Southern Recreation Grounds, had a meeting where he was pretty harsh.
Right,
talking
and these
about
people came and they arrested him and all of that. And it wasn't very long after that that the case came up, and it lasted 9 days. I went to that court every single day with my heart in my mouth for the first 1 or 2 days. Then when I saw the way Vivian Blake fought that case, I knew that the prosecution didn't have a chance. I knew that much.
Incidentally, and this is for, again, for the youngsters watching this, they'd be familiar with this name. Edward St. George was the Solicitor General at that time.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Yeah.
He was the Solicitor General. And some more. There were some more names there, but I haven't read the book in a little while, so I'm not quite.
Yeah, that's
I
okay.
didn't have a lot of time.
You have enough in your head. You read for us to talk about. At the beginning of the case, I would imagine your heart is in your mouth. You don't know what's going to happen. You think Randol is going to jail for a long time. Halfway through, and Vivian Blake is fighting this case for you, and you think you're going to be all right.
Yes. I went there simply because of my sisters. One was a nurse, and she said, I'll go with you every day. Her name is Joan. And she said, I'll be there every day with you. And if you faint, I got my smelling salts.
The case.
And then there were other sisters who came and said, what are you going to do about your handbag and this and that? And they brought this and they brought the next thing, and they saw to it that I was well turned out. And I went.
I'm going to ask you about the end of the case. Before we get to the end of the case, you always got support from your family? Your parents didn't sit down at some point and say, girl, what did you get into?
And no, not at all. In fact, Randol said so many times, your father is my best friend.
Yeah.
And I would also hear Douglas say something like that. He would say, Francis, that's my first child, Francis is my best friend. He'd say that, and I'd hear that around. And by the way, I had 4 of them, but I don't recall my children fighting, although there were 10 of us, and I...
You fought with your siblings. Your children, they got along pretty well.
Yeah. And today, I said to them last week, I said, there were 3 of them sitting on the back of in a chair, and one was taking the blood pressure of the other 2. Rosie was in the center. And I said, I wish I had a camera right this minute, you know.
Get a photo of that.
They can be quite close, yeah.
The trial is over. What do you do? How do you celebrate now that Randol is free of this?
Well, the first thing, the trial is over, the door is open, and the prisoner walks out of the dock, the prisoner's dock. And I rushed forward, but they broke the barricades, and they were ahead of me. When I look, I saw him lifted into the air, and they walked straight from the courthouse to the Southern Park. And it was told me that they said, now, Brother Fawkes, talk your talk.
Yeah.
And I never saw him until 3 a.m. the next morning.
But you know he was in good hands.
Oh, yes. I slept. And I slept very soundly. Telephone calls came in, people came in, you know. You always have well-wishers. You always have a few well-wishers.
We're going to talk about some more of those events that seem to be just what his life was about, one event after the other. But we're going to talk some more about that, but we got to take a break. And we'll be back with more legends after this. Welcome back. You're watching Legends Whence We Came. I'm Anthony Newbold, and my guest is Lady Jacqueline Fawkes. We're talking about her life with the late Sir Randol Fawkes. End of the last segment, and we're talking about Sir Randol. He's done with the sedition trial, and he's gone to Southern Rec, and you are sleeping the sleep of the just, right? Before we get into the more, you obviously were at peace, certainly after the trial.
Yes.
But also I'm getting the feeling that you had a very comfortable home life, soothing, if you will. And I think you told me earlier that we were talking about him with the piano and the poems. Mm-hmm. Music played a pretty big role in your life.
I think, as you said a moment ago, if music is the soul of life, play on. But I want to acknowledge first that as soon as our children were old enough, mm-hmm. We taught them to pray mm-hmm. every evening. We also read the Bible with them when they were able to read. Mm-hmm. And they went to Sunday school. Sunday school was quite early in the morning. Then they went with their cousins, the Burnsides and the DeVoes. Mm-hmm. And later on, I said to my husband, I think these children should learn music because I enjoyed it so much. Even in Grand Bahama, my mother had a Victrola, we called it in those days. And because she lived with an English woman who had run away from the war, the 1914 war, and was living in Grand Bahama. Mm-hmm. And she said, Mrs. Wilshcombe, can this little girl, my grandmother had about 8 of those little daughters, says, can this little girl live with me for a while? And my mother lived there. In 1918, the war was over. Mm-hmm. And when she was going back to England, my mother refused to go with her, so she left her all her great music. And so my mother, who was a very careful person, kept all these things. So I too was in love with music, although right then I didn't know it. My mother would let me just wind up the thing, and I would play, and I would hear these great voices. And then later on, I said, I heard that voice before, who is it? You only 3 or 4. Yeah. And Randol would say, that's the great Caruso.
Yes.
Things like that. Mm-hmm. And then there were things by Franz Liszt, and all those things were familiar already
great
to
masters,
me.
Yeah.
And I found out that I really loved it, but he couldn't afford a piano. We couldn't afford a piano. Both of us were working, but we couldn't afford a piano. So I went to his mother, who had an old piano in her living room, and I said, may I have this for our children? You're not using it. She said, my dear, you're welcome to it. It has a lot of termite, but if you'll get the music, but you'll have to put up with the termite too. Mm-hmm. So I said, that's fine with me. I just want the music, and I'll attend to that. Mm-hmm. So by the time she was 7 and Francis was 8, they were on to Gloria Barrett.
Yes.
And you remember Gloria Barrett?
Yes.
And then Clement Bethel.
Yes.
And Francis even had a year with Mrs. Cumberbatch.
Cumberbatch, okay.
Yes, because Clement had to go away for a while. And he ended up in the Royal Academy of Music. Rosalie decided that she wanted to be, and thank God for that too, she wanted to be a teacher of English. She wanted to be a teacher of English, so she taught for 28 years in English, GCE and the rest of it. And so that is the reason she was able to do her father's book, the memorial edition.
Yeah, but underlying all of that is your music, yeah.
The music, yes. The kids caught on to the music. And, whenever they did the smallest little Mozart thing, the father and the mother, we were always there to clap them. Mm-hmm. We would put them into every concert, and we would put them into every competition there was. Mm-hmm. And when they came home with a trophy, that we were always there to. Mm.
Did you ever get any resistance from them? Did Mummy, I don't want to go and do this again? Yeah.
Yes. Well, the third child, a son, he knew, a very smart guy, he knew very much what he wanted to do. At least we thought he was very smart because he used to get big on IQ tests, I guess.
Okay.
And so we sent him to Nikki St. George, and we later says, "How's he doing?" She says, "He's more in love with my cats." I went to get him one day, and there was a cat on the shoulder, and a cat on the shoulder, and one on his head. And I said, "Obviously, Randall, that's not going to work. What shall we do?" And he says, "Let's try him with the concertina or something." So we sent him to Mr. Mallory. You remember him?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And he stayed there for a while, and then we sent him to a police to do a clarinet. But now he plays, it's pretty good at it too, by ear.
Okay.
And so that is kind of satisfying. Then there was another one we sent to we sent him to do the violin, and the lady said to me, I'll keep this one, but and that one turned out to be a pretty good violinist at Queen's College.
Okay.
And that was David.
It was David.
And David played in all the musicals and things like that, Oklahoma,
and of course Francis. I remember Francis playing the piano at St. Augustine's.
Yes, I think we brought some of his music.
Okay.
We also did things like there were what we call soirees.
Yes.
Musical evenings. And we would have anybody who was interested in classical music, we would have them to come to our home. People were on time. If you said the evening is going to begin at 6, they were there at 6, and many people took part. You had people coming in from the schools. You had people coming in from Christ Church Cathedral because they had 4 singers there that were very good. They always, if I were a rich man, I always remember them singing that one. And it got so popular around here that one day I got a call from Clement Bethel, and he said, somebody at the embassy has brought in a friend who knows how to play the violin. Can we use your home for another soiree? And I was very, very happy about that.
Yeah, to see that somebody else appreciated that music as much as you did.
Yes, because they did come, like the U.S. Embassy. They did, the ambassador, 2 of them, Moncrief, I think one was named Moncrief Spare, and the very first one that they met in power when the government turned over.
When the government changed.
But what I wanted to say too, I wanted to make this point. At one point, when Randall had to just leave Nassau to, he called it self-exile, and they thought, I guess, at that time, that we were going to destroy him. But his mother, who was also a very strong woman, and I was a young woman, she said to me, "My dear, they're only trying to break his spirit."
Yeah.
And so he went away, and what they thought was going to be the end of him turned out that he studied the trade union movement, he came back here, and it was that very force that helped to change the Bahamas at, shall we call it, majority rule.
Yeah.
It was that very force.
Was there ever any question in your mind, or his mind for that matter, that he would go into politics?
In the very beginning?
Yeah.
No.
Well, later on. He may not have started to go into politics, but as time went on and he saw the status quo.
About in the 3rd year, people started to say to me, because he never wanted to buy a car, never was interested, and I didn't care. And so I would go for my groceries and hire a cab, and the cab drivers would say, "We just like the way he spoke to that judge during that case. He's going to speak up for us, and in the next general election, he'll be our representative."
Yeah, yeah.
That's when
and eventually the groundswell got to the point where they just said it was almost a draft Randall for Parliament movement.
Yes, I didn't really think too much of that.
What was there, and this is a period of great activity and change, obviously, was there ever any concern on your part for his safety?
Oh, for my safety, for his safety, for our children's safety. During the general strike, you'd get telephone calls that said, look, we're going to blow up your house. And it was they were so persistent with it that I called the police department and spoke with the commissioner of police about it. I think he was Colchester Wims, I'm not sure.
Colchester Wims, yeah.
And he said, don't worry, we're going to take care of it. One night, while I was asleep, I'd just fallen asleep, I heard these heavy shoes on the drive outside, and I was so afraid, I just jumped up. I said, oh my God, they came to catch us, you know. And anyway, they said, police, you know. And then I saw some great big searchlights, and they were going around the base of the house.
Yeah, just checking to make sure that. And
they did that every few hours.
Yeah, and of course.
I had 3 children at it, and they all had the measles. And all, like every now and then, Mommy, I itch.
Gonna ask Rosie about that in a minute, because this is 1958 in the general strike.
This is
we're talking
1958.
about.
She was only a little girl. She may not. I'm sure she doesn't remember that.
Yeah, and we're skipping now, and I think I may want to hold this because we're gonna have to take a final break in a minute. That's how quickly these minutes are going. I want to talk to you because eventually, after all of the trials and tribulations, and he's gone and he's represented these people and charged with sedition, and he's gotten this labor movement galvanized. He's into politics now, and eventually he is made a minister in the government of the Bahamas. Tell me how that felt for you and him.
Well, that was really a victory, I thought. A real victory. It didn't last very long, but I am still proud to this day that he gave that vote.
And I think somewhere in his book...
To this day, I am still proud of that. Whether they appreciated it then, or whether they appreciate it today, it doesn't matter. Randol Fawkes did the right thing.
Yeah.
His wife thinks that.
That's what's most important, eh? That's what's most important. We're going to talk a little bit more about that politics, and we're going to bring Rosie in here for this last segment. But we got to take this final break, and we'll be back with more legends after this. Welcome back to this final segment of Legends Whence We Came. I'm Anthony Newbold, and I'm speaking with Lady Jacqueline Fawkes. We're talking about her husband, Sir Randol, and we're now joined by one of the children, Rosalie. Rosie, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
Tell me, what was it like growing up Fawkes, I call it? What was it like being one of the Fawkes children?
I had a very happy childhood. Our home was full of music.
You were obviously not one of those children who resisted going to music.
Well, I did, you know.
You did?
I enjoyed it at first. And then, of course, if you want to be proficient, you have to practice every day.
Yes.
And I soon grew weary of that. And I recall begging Mom to quit. And she would say, well, you quit brownies and you quit ballet, but you're not going to quit the piano.
Yeah.
And so both parents insisted that I stay with it. Mm-hmm. And apparently they saw something that I didn't see. And, you know, as I got older, we entered a lot of competitions. We were always a part of the music festival. Mm-hmm. And we always won. Either I came first or Francis came first.
Yes.
But it seemed that nobody could beat us.
The few that I knew about, you're
yes.
right.
And so there was always the final concert, and Mom and Dad were always there, and they were so proud of us. Mm-hmm. And so there was great joy in winning these competitions. I enjoyed that immensely. But it was a very happy childhood. Nowadays, when I read the book,
yes.
I just can't believe that there was so much controversy swirling around, you know, the Fawkes household.
And you knew absolutely nothing
about it. We were shielded from it. And of course, there was a large extended family, mm-hmm. and Mom's parents were on the Fort Hill and Dad's parents, and mm-hmm. My dad didn't drive. I think we got our first car in 1960, and so we were always walking the streets. And one thing I remember about Daddy was that he loved people, and wherever he went, he was always saying, "My brother, my sister, so happy to see you this morning." Yeah. And I recall asking him, I said, "Why do you call everybody your brother or your sister?" And he said, "All men are my brothers and sisters." You know, and so we walked the streets. We would walk from McPherson Street up to the Fort Hill, mm-hmm. and his parents, I recall, they always sat out on a front porch from about 3 o'clock in the afternoon mm-hmm. to late in the evening. They were there holding court, and Dad would go and sit on the front porch. I don't know what they were discussing, and I would go over by the Burnsides, or I would walk a little further down the road, mm-hmm. and I would go to Mom's parents' house, and mm-hmm. there were always cousins and aunts, so a very happy time for us.
Because of his personality, and mm-hmm. obviously your mother's, mm-hmm. but because of his personality, and how did that affect what you turned out to be? How much were you influenced by what he was?
I think I have a greater appreciation for who Daddy was nowadays.
Now you would.
Yes, yeah. Growing up, I didn't think about it at all. Mm-hmm. Yes.
But you look at how you conducted your life. Did you think for a moment that some of what you were being and what you were doing was a direct result of the kind of man that he was?
I think so. When I think about my father at home, I can only picture him at a desk or a table. Yeah. And he was always reading and writing. Yeah. Yeah. And I recall that growing up, I too went to the Southern Public Library every single day. Mm-hmm. And I would read the books in a day, and the next day I would be running off to the library. So that literary part of him, yes, that was passed on to all of the children, and all of us enjoy reading.
Yeah, and I want you to talk some more about that reading, because I spent the first 10 years of my life in Cat Island.
Yes.
But I always say that before I left Cat Island, I went around the world 2 times, because I read from I was about 3 or 4, something, I don't know. The prodigy, of course. Just kidding. How did reading affect your life?
Well, I enjoyed it immensely. My favorite childhood author was Enid Blyton.
Enid Blyton.
And every book that she wrote, I would read. And in fact, I would awaken in the morning. I wouldn't even open the blinds. Yeah. But as soon as I would turn over, I would just grab a book and I would start to read. Yes.
Talking about books, you produced a copy of Sir Randol's writings.
Yes.
Labor Unite or Perish.
Yes.
Tell me about those. Why now, first of all?
Well, in my late teens, when I would come home from college, Dad was just getting started with The Faith That Moved the Mountain. Right. And I remember him prevailing upon me to read this book. And, you know, I found it so hard going, I just couldn't quite relate to those experiences. Yeah. But, you know, I would go through it and I would circle what I considered to be an error. Yes. But he was very proud of his writing. He thought it was superb, you know. So
it was pretty good.
He just brushed my criticisms aside. And when he died, it was quite a shock. And, you know, we weren't prepared for it, but we found ourselves in the throes of having to plan a funeral. Yeah. And there was a room in Dad's house known as the library. And he was very nervous about this library, and he had a right to be, because when I lived at home, I liked to have the house very, very clean.
And in order,
it bothered,
right?
yes, and it bothered me that there was this room, and there were so many newspapers, old newspapers, magazines, books, boxes, and I wanted to get into this library to clean it up.
Yeah.
And oftentimes he would accuse me of throwing away important pieces of information. But this door was locked. He had died, and we got into the library because we were trying to find something for the funeral program. And my brother David, a cousin of mine, Gina Rogers, a former employee at ZNS, we went into the library, and I'm not exaggerating, but there wasn't 1 inch of space on which to walk. The entire floor was covered.
Yeah.
And we were frantic because time was moving on, and this funeral date had been selected, and we just didn't have time. So we started digging through boxes, opening drawers, etc. And we came across so many significant finds. I came across old newspapers dating back to the early 1950s.
Yeah.
Photographs that I had never seen before.
Yeah.
So we got what we wanted for the funeral, but it was at that time that I decided that I wasn't going to let Daddy's written legacy die. It was at that precise moment in time that I decided that after the funeral I would classify the material and then get it back into print, because there were just a limited number of copies of the 3rd edition of The Faith That Moved the Mountain left.
Right, and so you got Labor Unite.
Yeah, now with Labor Unite or Perish, those are articles that Sir Randol wrote in the Nassau Herald in 1955.
Okay.
And when I came across these old, tattered newspaper copies, I showed them to Mom, and she said, oh, this article, this is just one in a series of articles that Sir Randol wrote. And so I went to the archives, hoping that I would be able to find all of these articles. And surely enough, yes, Mrs. Searle Stevenson had deposited all the back issues of the Herald at the archives, and so I was able to retrieve all of those newspaper articles.
Part of his legacy is this red tie that's next to you. Tell me about the red tie before we have to leave.
Francis had a very interesting story that we had never heard before. He said that one day he asked Dad why he always wore a red tie. About 2 years prior to his death, Dad always had on this red tie, and I never thought to ask him. I just, thought it was some little idiosyncrasy, but I didn't know there was any real meaning as to his wearing the red tie. And he said that he wore the red tie to remind him of the blood atonement of Jesus Christ. And when Francis told us this story, I said, oh my goodness, what a pity we don't have a picture of Dad, wearing the red tie. And as we were going through the library, I came across a picture, a very good picture of Dad, and he had the red tie on. Nobody had ever seen the photograph. Not even Mom.
For us.
Well, it's on the cover of the Memorial Edition.
Of the
Yes, the
Memorial
Memorial Edition.
Okay.
Yes, and so we went around to all the photographers trying to find out who had taken the photograph, and we couldn't find out. Anyway, going through the canceled checks, I came across a check made out to Mr. Andrew Aiken. Yes, and I went to him, and he said he had taken, and of course he had several shots of that particular picture. And so consequently, that is why that picture is on the Memorial Edition of The Faith That Moved the Mountain.
Good show. We're coming to the very end. How do you want your husband to be remembered?
Well, I think I would be very happy if they remembered him just for what he was, without adding or subtracting anything. Yes, sir.
Just a good man who was interested in family and trying to make his community better.
Yes, for historically, I think I would like to see more done about the contributions that he has made. I thought very highly of the majority rule. I thought very highly of the general strike. But as Rosalie said, When he saw a street sweeper or a garbage collector on the road, no matter how clean or not clean he was, he'd put his hand on his shoulder, he'd say, "My brother, I'm going to see to it that they buy gloves for those hands. Come to the Union Hall tonight and hear about how you can form this union. And they are going to have to pay attention to you. They're going to have to recognize you." I saw him do those things, and I realized all along just who he was.
Thank you very much, Lady Jacqueline. Thank you very much, Rosie.
Pleasure being here.
I'm Anthony Newbold. I've been talking with Lady Jacqueline Fawkes and one of Sir Randol Fawkes' children, Rosalie Fawkes. We've been remembering Sir Randol as we get set to celebrate Labor Day. Labor, a movement that he led for most of his life. Again, thank you for watching. Join us again next week for another edition of Legends. Good night.